This video is sponsored by Skillshare. The first 1,000 people to click the link in the description will get a free trial of Skillshare Premium. Do you know who play hugely important roles in society? Nurses. Nurses do so damn much in the world of healthcare, from giving patients their medicine, administering blood tests, and just being there for their patients mentally and emotionally. The world will always need nurses, and their value should always be appreciated, regardless of the global situation. A few years back, I broke my wrist pretty darn severely. I went from someone who spent minimal time in the hospital to someone staying in overnight and having to face surgery the following morning. I was pretty terrified, yet the people who eased my nerves the most were the nurses in the hospital who looked after me, always with a smile on their face and happy to help me with anything they could. However, nursing wouldn't be what it is today without the life, work and reforms of one key woman, that of course being Florence Nightingale. Though before we look into her incredible life and what remains of her famous last name, we have to examine that surname of Nightingale, because it's a name of immense interest and pretty darn pretty unto itself, I must admit. It's a name that seems to have come into English via Anglo-Saxon, seems to derive from the Old English nit, meaning night, and galad, meaning sing. So the name means night singer, and this etymology also lent itself to a type of bird with the same name too. And perhaps this is me looking too much into the name, but this surname meaning singer in the night does kind of relate to something she'll be known for in her life, soothing people in the dark, but more on that later. However, there really was the chance that this name may never have found its way to her, and instead of singing the praises of Florence Nightingale, we might be singing the praises of Florence Shaw. Why is this the case? Well, I'm sure you know the tradition is for children to take their father's surname, and Florence's father initially had the surname of Shaw. William Edward Shaw only became William Edward Nightingale when he inherited the estate of his great uncle Peter Nightingale in 1815, and it seems that he inherited that surname too. As mentioned, William inherited the name in 1815, and Florence will be born 5 years later on the 12th of May 1820. If you couldn't guess from the inheriting of an entire estate, Florence's parents were pretty darn well off. Her father William was a wealthy landowner, and her mother Frances Nightingale was from a family of successful merchants and enjoyed socialising with people of importance at the time. I don't believe she worked herself, which was the expected thing of women of that status at that time. She was born during her parents' extended honeymoon, and they happened to be honeymooning in Florence, Italy, which explains her first name too. She was actually the younger of two daughters. It wasn't expected for girls to be educated at the time, but her father insisted that she takes a classical education. She became adept in maths and stats, as well as enjoying languages like German, French and Italian. She was a smart but shy child, never wanting to be the centre of attention. It seems that even from a young age, Florence enjoyed caring for people. While she lived on a very well-to-do estate, the young girl would often help the ill and poor in the surrounding villages. As mentioned with her mother, the expected thing of women of Florence's status at that time was to not work, get married, have children, cook, sew, read, entertain and so on. It was a lifestyle her mother and many other women enjoyed, but it wasn't for Florence. She just wanted to help people, and by 16 years old, she knew what she wanted to do with her life, and that was to be a nurse. She even believed that this was her divine calling in life, that God had called to her, telling her to help those suffering. Her parents were not happy at all about this desire to be a nurse. Women of her status were not expected to work, especially as nurses. Nursing at this time in history wasn't the most beloved or respected lines of work. It was grimy, dirty work for those from a much lower class to undertake. William and Frances definitely didn't want their youngest daughter anywhere near a Victorian hospital. Though she really didn't want to be a housewife, her calling was to help those in need, so much so that she actually rejected a marriage proposal in 1849. Her parents finally caved in, however, and in 1850 allowed her to study nursing. She didn't study in her home nation of the United Kingdom, however. Instead, she went to the Institution of Protestant Deaconesses in Kaiserswerth, Germany, to study her calling of nursing. It was in Germany she picked up so many vital skills that allowed her to become the nurse she is known as to this day. Perhaps most importantly, understanding the importance of cleanliness in hospitals. By 1853, however, she was back in London. Not only was she working in a hospital, she was pretty much running the place. Her care for attention and education allowed her to quickly rise through the ranks. Her rise to prominence in the healthcare world actually got her on the radar of many important people as someone you should go to for any advice on how to care for people. and that advice would be needed by 1854, as it was that year the Crimean War broke out. It was the UK, France and Turkey against the Russians. War is of course a rather messy affair, which leads to the unfortunate death and injuries of many people. This was to be expected for the people back in Britain, but what the British people didn't expect to hear about were the poor conditions in which the wounded were being quote unquote treated in. News reached the UK of these poor conditions of the war hospitals in Crimea. Many men were dying unnecessarily due to infections in them, and there was little to no supplies to help them recover and rejoin the fight. Minister of War at the time was a man by the name of Sidney Herbert, and he knew things needed to change. And he knew of a nurse who had become incredibly well known in London for her skill and expertise in the field. Florence Nightingale. She and a team of nurses were summoned to Crimea to help change things there. And when Florence arrived in Crimea, the hospitals were in an awful state. They were overcrowded and filthy, with blocked drains and broken toilets. Bugs and rats could be seen scurrying across the floor. On top of the squalid conditions, there weren't enough supplies. The war hospitals were lacking medicine, blankets, food, clean water and even beds, with many wounded soldiers having to sleep on the dirty floor. It's easy to see why so many already wounded soldiers were dying in the hospitals from infections they picked up there. She knew that if hospital conditions improved, these soldiers would get better and in turn there'd be less death. It was during her time in Crimea where Florence Nightingale became the figurehead for nurses she is known as to this day, thanks to the changes and reforms she implemented there. There are 3 key areas in which Nightingale focused on to improve in hospitals. This was inventory/supplies, cleanliness and kindness. Florence made sure the hospitals were stocked with everything they needed, from medicine to food and water to beds. She even used her own money to make sure that this would be achieved. As for cleanliness, Florence, her nurses, and the least ill hospital patients went around the hospital scrubbing them from top to bottom. Her time in Germany made her realise just how important it was to keep things clean to help reduce the risk of infection spreading. Wounded soldiers' clothes were clean too, outside away from the injured. And as for kindness, well, Florence made sure to always put the patients first in everything she did, constantly checking in on them and attending to any issues they might have. Even in the night she could be seen checking in on people, illuminated by her now famous gas lamp. It was during this time she attained her nicknames of Lady with the Lamp and the Angel of Crimea. And like I alluded to, this does relate to that surname of Nightingale. I mean, singing in the night and the idea of soothing sick patients all through the night seem kind of fitting, though maybe I'm over-examining. Anyway, these hospital reforms reduced hospital deaths by 2/3 and changed healthcare and nursing forever. She also wrote about her ideas on healthcare extensively too. Something else she really helped pioneer but isn't seemingly as known for is making information more accessible. Much of her writing was written in plain, simple English, so lower class people could read, understand, and implement it. She also somewhat created infographics and pioneered visualizing data. Her most famous graph shows the amount of deaths caused by hospital infections, and she wrote of it saying, "Diagrams are of great utility for illustrating certain questions of vital statistics by conveying ideas on the subject through the eye, which cannot be so readily grasped when constrained in figures." And this seemingly took off, as graphs and infographics like this are still seen all around us to this day. As someone who has made a career out of making information easy to understand, I find it remarkable to see it relates all the way back to Florence Nightingale. With the war ended and Florence back in London, she was now seen as a national hero. Her work elevated the role of nurses from lowly jobs to the downtrodden to the highly respected job they are today. She opened nursing schools and even got to spend time with Queen Victoria, who wanted to thank her personally for her help in the war. However, the young girl who didn't want to be the centre of attention was still there. She wasn't the biggest fan of this fame and started going under the name Miss Smith, as her actual name was starting to attract too much attention on her. Unfortunately, however, her time reforming hospitals in Crimea came at a cost, as she herself got infected and sick. The last 40 or so years of her life was spent under the shadow of her illness, and she was bedridden more often than not, though that didn't stop her meeting with people who wanted advice from her. Despite being homebound and bedridden, she still lived to the age of 90, dying in August 1910, though her legacy in hospitals lives on. But what did she leave behind other than her legacy? Is there anyone related to her that is still alive? And better yet, do they still bear that name of Nightingale? Well, remember how she rejected that one marriage proposal? It seems she maintained that stance throughout her life. It seems that she never got married or had children. I read that some think she stayed celibate her entire life. She was a very religious woman and felt that nursing was her divine calling. She devoted her life to this cause, which really explains to us why she wasn't interested in procreating. So to find the living relative, we're going to have to look a little further afield. To find an answer this time, we have to look to Florence's cousin, General Sir Luvian Nicholson. While this might seem like quite the stretch, it seems these two cousins were actually rather close. They would spend a lot of time playing together as children, and as he became a general, he served during the Crimean War, and they would have met once again in the war hospitals in Crimea. Luvian would have seen firsthand the reforms his cousin was implementing in hospitals. He died in 1893 of typhoid, survived by 10 children, so quite different compared to Florence. The youngest of these 10 children was called Francis Luvian Nicholson, and his daughter Margaret Povey is still alive today. This makes her the granddaughter of the cousin of Florence Nightingale, so if anyone knows what the name is for this relationship, please let me know. And while she may not have the surname of Nightingale, she carried on her ancestors' legacy by becoming a nurse herself, though not any ordinary nurse. Florence set up the first school just for nursing in St Thomas' Hospital in London, and nurses who went to this school got the unique title of Nightingale Nurse. Margaret Povey, the eldest living relative of Florence Nightingale, trained to be a nurse at St Thomas' Hospital and became a Nightingale nurse, so in some ways she still does in fact carry that name. It's safe to say that nursing is quite the skill, and it definitely isn't for everyone, but if you're interested in learning a new skill, then why not visit Skillshare, who have sponsored today's video. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of inspiring classes for creative and curious people. Their platform allows you to explore new skills or even develop an existing skill. These online classes are not only fun and educational, but the skills taught in them could help you in a huge variety of ways, whether that be as a way to unwind in your personal life or to help you move forward in your profession of choice. I checked out their iPad illustration line drawing essential class by Robert Jenner III. You may not know, but Name Explain is actually illustrated by hand on an iPad, so this class really taught me some interesting tips and tricks which I hope to bring to these videos. This is just one of their many creative classes. Skillshare Premium gives you unlimited access to thousands of classes, which you can also enjoy offline with the Skillshare app. The first 1,000 people to use my link in the description will get a free trial of Skillshare Premium, and after that, it's only around $10 a month. It's a great deal and an amazing way to learn something new and useful. Once again, thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring today's show, and don't forget, the first 1,000 people to click the link in the description will get to enjoy a free trial of Skillshare Premium. Thank you to all my patrons who support Name Explain on a monthly basis. Patreon is vital to Name Explain, and donating just $2 a month allows you to enjoy ad-free videos and bonus Patreon exclusive content. It also allows you to help choose what names get explained in upcoming videos, and gets your name here with all these awesome people. Thank you so much for all the support you guys give Name Explain. Hello all, and thank you so much for reaching the end of the video. Check out another video and subscribe to stay in the loop on all things Name Explain. You can find me on Twitter, I'm at NameExplainYT. On Instagram, I'm also NameExplainYT, and on Facebook, just search Name Explain. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and once again, thank you all so much.